My name is Ivana Nikolic-Hughes. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ivana Nikolic-Hughes, and I'm the president of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. I'm pleased to welcome you to this evening's 21st Frank K. Kelly Lecture on Humanity's Future with Professor Richard Falk. The contrast, thank you. The contrast between being in these beautiful grounds on this gorgeous California evening could not be greater relative to the state of our world today. On the one hand, we have an incredible planet on which humanity, alongside millions of other life forms that we're so fortunate to share Mother Earth with, could thrive for eons to come. On the other, we have wars raging around the globe that in concert have been referred to as World War III. We have a deranged president threatening to end the Persian civilization as we speak. We have suffering and devastation around the world as a result of violence, oppression, and a lack of even the most basic of resources. We have a warming climate, collapsing ecosystems, and continued assaults on our environment, not only from greenhouse gas emissions, but through toxic wastes, including deadly radiological contamination. We have total and utter disregard for international law by the United States, Israel, and other so-called developed countries. And we have nuclear weapons. Weapons that could end not just human civilization, but life itself in less time than it will take to go through tonight's program. Neither the timescale nor the seriousness of consequences of nuclear war that I contend here are an exaggeration. I'm not exaggerating. That we have allowed ourselves to live under the sword of Damocles, as President John F. Kennedy put it in 1961, while mostly ignoring all other global and regional threats to human beings and our planet, is an ongoing crime, and one waiting to pounce at any moment when we may or may not expect it, stamping out not only us, but all future generations. Established in 2002, the Kelly Lecture Series honors the vision of the late Frank K. Kelly, who was a founder and senior vice president of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. Each year, a lecture is presented by a distinguished individual to explore humanity's present circumstances and ways by which we can shape a more promising future for our planet and its inhabitants. Such luminaries as Robert J. Lifton, Mary Corrigan McGuire, Daniel Ellsberg, Helen Caldicott, Oliver Stone, Peter Kuznick, Annie Jacobson, and others have spoken at these events, sharing their wisdom and insight on challenges and opportunities for humankind. In 2002, the year of the series' founding, Frank A. Kelly delivered the very first lecture. I want to read to you an excerpt from this lecture that I found so touching and inspiring. In quotes, "One world has never been enough for me. When I was a child, I was drawn to the stars. I imagined that I came from another galaxy. When I walked at night in my father's backyard and gazed at those blazing lights, I did not feel dwarfed by them or overcome by their immensity. I wanted to look over the horizon, to search for the hidden marvels, to see the unseen, to hear the signals that might be coming from other forms of life. I did not regard the stars as menacing or as solar centers for alien creatures more powerful than human beings. I saw them as playgrounds for my mind and spirit, and I still do. He was saying, I think he was around 90 years old when he delivered this lecture. The following year, it was Professor Richard Falk who delivered the second Frank K. Kelly lecture on humanity's future. And now I'd like to read a quote from that lecture. In quotes, I sometimes say, in defense against despair, that I'm not smart enough to be a pessimist, because to know what the future has in store for us implies an ability to understand reality well enough to be able to predict the future. And as the Chinese have long taught us, now another set of quotes, there's nothing harder to predict than the future. End of quotes. Of course, such an inability is as disabling for optimists as it is for pessimists. I would prefer to recast the choices between struggle and passivity, with struggle taking the place of optimism and passivity standing in for pessimism. End of quote. In 2003, the United States was about to embark on a tragic and devastating war in Iraq. Today, we're in war with Iran, despite the ceasefire, one of the world's oldest civilizations, threatening, as President Trump put it on more than one occasion, to bomb them into the Stone Age. And so, as we were thinking about this year's lecture, we realized that in this critical moment in our nation's history, in world history, we needed to hear from Richard again. He's the only person who will deliver his second Frank K. Kelly lecture. So let's give him a round of applause for that. So here's how this evening will unfold. I will now invite Dr. Mara Sweeney, who's a member of the board of directors of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, to introduce Richard. Following Mara's introduction, Richard will deliver his lecture. At that point, he and I will engage in dialogue about the past, present, and future of humanity. Unfortunately, our dear Cynthia Lazaroff, who's in your program and was going to be a part of the conversation, has had to stay back in Hawaii where she lives for health reasons. Cynthia has shared some remarks and questions for Richard for us to use in the dialogue. We dearly miss her and send her our healing thoughts and prayers. Following the discussion, we will have an opportunity for the audience to ask Richard some questions. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mara Sweeney.
It's a pleasure to introduce Professor Richard Falk, who will deliver tonight's 21st Frank K. Kelly Lecture on Humanity's Future. My name is Mara Sweeney, and as some of you know, I'm the daughter of David and Carolee Krieger. My father co-founded the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation and led it as its president from the founding in 1982 until his retirement at the end of 2019. He remained deeply engaged with the foundation until his passing at the end of 2023. And I'm honored to continue to contribute to the cause and mission that he cared about so fervently. When Richard and his wife Hillel moved to Santa Barbara, my father was overjoyed. He recognized immediately that having such a towering figure, an expert right here in our community, would be a huge boon, not just to the efforts of the foundation, but to the cause of peace and disarmament. Together, they wrote books and articles and became dear friends. With Richard quickly immersing himself in the work of NAPF, serving as the chairman of the board of directors from 2005 to 2010, followed by his role as senior vice president of the foundation, a title he still holds. If I were to give you Richard's full and complete biography, we would be here for a week, at least. In your program, you have some snippets about his long and distinguished career, marked extraordinarily by not just academic expertise and scholarship, but peace activism and policy service. He was a professor of international law at Princeton University for 40 years, UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the Palestinian territories, and most recently, president of the Gaza Tribunal. He has written over 75 books and thousands of articles in academic journals and the popular press. His memoir, Public Intellectual: The Life of a Citizen Pilgrim, reads like a history of nearly a century of developments around the world, with highlights of his own roles in many of the major ones, including in Vietnam, Iran, Israel and Palestine, Turkey, and more. Among his many awards, I'd like to highlight that his book, This Endangered Planet, published in 1972, was named in 2022, 50 years later, by the Council on Foreign Relations, one of 6 best books of the century, and one of 3 books essential to understanding the upcoming century. He's also the recipient of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation's Lifetime Achievement Award, which was bestowed in 2023. If you're up for a challenge, you can try to keep up with Richard's prolific writing by following his blog, Citizen Pilgrim, where he tackles the issues of global justice in the 21st century. His energy, wisdom, and contributions are truly endless. And we're endlessly grateful in turn for those gifts of knowledge and understanding that he has bestowed on the world, and for sharing them with us all tonight. Please join me in welcoming Professor Richard Falk.
Thank you all for coming on this momentous day in American history. Thank you, Mara, for gracious and intimidating words of introduction. You set the bar so high that the best I can hope for is mild disappointment. And that goes a little bit for you too, Ivana. But it is with, we happen to be meeting at a time in world history and in the American experience that will long be remembered, I think, in the same way that the Cuban Missile Crisis is remembered. I had assumed we'd be meeting in the midst of a genocidal escalation of the Iran war. And I felt that was something that could be a decisive experience in negativity, not only for Iran, but for the US and for much of the world. This pause of 20 days gives us hope, but it also is a challenge to do more than protest, to manifest a spirit of resistance. It is a time when we should be talking seriously about invoking the 25th Amendment. If we really value our constitutional heritage and the promise of this country, to remain silent at this time is to be complicit in a criminal process that is not only dangerous, but undermines our positive sense of national identity. We cannot let that happen, and I hope we will not let it happen. We know now from historical reckoning that and good scholarship that we evaded an apocalyptic catastrophe in 1962 by what was described by the leading historian of the subject, Martin Sherwin, as stumbling into good luck. And whether that can happen again is something we should not be counting on. We need a system of governance nationally, regionally, and globally that isn't vulnerable to the sort of warmongering leadership that Israel and the United States have brought to the Middle East and to the world. It's a time of serious reckoning with who we are and what we will become. And it's in that spirit that I just want to preface what I would like to talk about with a quote from our president and another quote that warns us of what is at stake. Just a few days ago, Trump said in a manner that needed to be taken seriously, that a whole civilization, I'm quoting, a whole civilization will die tonight. That would be this evening, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change, where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Those few words are so filled with delusion and apocalyptic thinking as to justifiably scare us into what I described as the moment where the failure to invoke the 25th Amendment will be long remembered in the history of the country. The other quote I want to read was looking toward this abyss, which could be a nuclear abyss. Paul Krugman, a respected Nobel economist, a former colleague of mine at Princeton for a while, had this to say just this morning, actually, on his Substack. Damned if I know what's going to happen. I mean, at some level, I think that the civilization that may be destroyed tonight is our own. I mean, are we civilized if we do this kind of thing? If America as a nation doesn't stand up against this, what are we? So God help us. Normal life will continue. It's going to be a really weird thing to be out there, you know, grocery shopping and taking the subway and all of these things. But this is, in a way, the defining moment. The fate of the whole American idea is on the line. I have no idea how this ends. And I think that those kinds of sentiments are on many minds. Confusion as to what to do and bewilderment as to how we got to where we are and how we escape once more. And how can we escape without relying on whether you call it luck or divine intervention? That's not the way to govern a planet that has this kind of weaponry and is faced with these sorts of severe ecological challenges. It won't last forever, that kind of thinking. We've tempted the apocalyptic disaster now in ways that should perform as a kind of pedagogy of living in the 21st century, or in the words of the name of this foundation, of living in the nuclear age. We are no longer children of the nuclear age, and we seem to be suffering at the moment from premature dementia, but let's hope that's a temporary passing phase. I wanted, as someone that has been happily connected with the Nuclear Age Foundation ever since Hillel and I moved here 24 years ago, I wanted to say just a few words about the leadership that it has enjoyed in this period. And it's been its great good fortune to have two inspirational presidents since its founding moment. Very few organizations can make such a claim. But I have benefited greatly, and we both, Hillel and I, have both found that the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation has been more than an organization dedicated to what may be the most pressing challenge of our time, but it has also established a human community that is in its own way, a microcosm of what we would like the world to be. And that's a great achievement and a tribute to this kind of leadership that the organization has enjoyed. David Krieger, as Mara put it movingly, David Krieger was the president of the organization from its founding 37 years ago. And we happened to be friends before we came to Santa Barbara, due to our shared commitment to a denuclearizing world. And we bonded more closely once living in the same community. And partly because we shared two non-dedicated passions, poetry and tennis. In the spirit of remembrance, I want to read the last stanza of David's fine poem, Promises of Peace, not only to affirm his legacy, but it so well expresses the motif of my remarks. And I quote, "There is no beauty in war, nor decency, nor wisdom. There is only force and blind obedience. Bombs fall, children die, and generals are celebrated. In the public square, new names, new sacrifice. Promises of peace give way to war." During the last several years, Ivana, who sits to my right, but doesn't live to my right, as we are happily aware that Ivana has brought to the foundation her extraordinary commitment, her charm, her charisma, and her warmth to all fortunate enough to have contact. Ivana met the formidable challenges of following in David's footsteps, in invigorating this foundation at a time of high risks and low public support. In a few short years, she has created an influential presence at the UN and in many other key venues concerned with nuclear policy issues, even managing a recent high visibility interview with the transformed media heavyweight Tucker Carlson. Speaking for Hillel and myself, and I'm sure for many of you here, Ivana, beyond her remarkable contributions to the work of the foundation, has brought enriching joys to our lives. We have all benefited from her vibrant motivational gifts to work harder and with a greater sense of purpose, and to do so for as long as it takes, while even managing to find stimulation and fellowship in the process. Finally, I wish to say just a word of anticipatory thanks to Cynthia Lazaroff for being with us virtually. She's able? Yeah. Oh, good. Cynthia has lived a life of profound dedication to achieving a series of related goals to empower humanity, to finally achieve peace and justice. And maybe her greatest achievement of all was to survive being a student of mine. We are deprived of her radiant physical presence for reasons of health, and this is a genuine deprivation for me, as we have been friends for so long. Tonight's program is also notable that the Foundation has come to embody the vision and enthusiasm of generations younger than David and myself and others, and that you notice that it is women that make up the major part of the program, my words being a mere prelude to what is to follow. By now you may be forgiven for suspecting that I'm trying to evade my assigned role to speak about the future of humanity, and you could be right. Appreciating the NAPF has always been about more than nuclear weapons. This is suggested by linking its name to the nuclear age with its search for peace. I find talking about peace and justice particularly daunting these days for two reasons. Aside from the existential crisis of this very hour, first, the nuclear and ecological storm clouds presently hovering over the planet and our country are beset by the radical unknowability about what will come next. We just have no real insight into the future given this degree of uncertainty. And learning to live with uncertainty is a challenge that few of us can really meet. This is accentuated by the chaos and uncertainties that haunt us even as we speak tonight, accentuated by the latest of Trump's arrogant ultimatums that unnerve even the most serene among us. And secondly, the second reason for reluctance to speak on these grandiose themes is that humanity, as embodied in distinct sovereign states and bound together due to a shared species destiny, is multiply entangled at present within a series of death traps from which there is no realistically visible escape. And indeed, scant evidence of even the will to escape from world leaders, aside from the denialism of our present leader. The warmongering entrapment is linked to a militarist pathology prevailing at this time in our own country and being played out in this war of unprovoked aggression waged against Iran, its government, and above all, its people. With some sense of shame as a US citizen, I quote the defining words of President Trump's latest bit of notorious foreign policy guidance posted just a few days ago on his private Truth Social channel. He says, Tuesday, this day, will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one, in Iran. There will be nothing like it. Open the fucking strait, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. And then the final words are the most mystifying. Praise be to Allah. What could that leader of ours have been thinking? In the spirit of taking seriously what it means to live in the nuclear age, what and why have things gone so wrong in what was a prosperous and powerful country and its people, and why its people are tolerating such leadership for this long? And of course, he is among those American presidents who've been elected twice. So we can't just blame him. It's a feature of present society that's linked to the way both political parties have performed in relation to what is best for America, not making America great as a dominant military power, but what would make it great as a country that created a model of how to live together in mutual respect and benefit. As suggested, the collective malady in this country should not be exclusively attributed to Trump, although his antics certainly bring them to the surface. Perhaps naively, I find shocking the establishment branding of the Iran war at the outset as a war of choice rather than calling it what it is, as a war of unabashed aggression. Even the New York Times, which I grew up revering as the most trusted source of commentary, has the reckless temerity to uncritically refer to the Iran war as the ultimate war of choice. This terminology recalls the earlier use of choice that was current during the 2003 Iraq War. And it's a disturbing twist in public discourse. A war of choice should have no place in a law or morality governed world order. Indeed, the whole point of the UN Charter is to remove from national sovereignty the question of choice when it comes to waging war, and to limit recourse to war to a strict definition of self-defense against a prior armed attack. In practice, this legal concept of war has been somewhat expanded by the urgencies of provocation or by credible evidence of aggressive intent by the state attacked. Iran is a clear victim of aggressive war, unprovoked, and as we speak, it is also living under the shadow of this threat of genocidal escalation. And what we should not forget is that that escalation is built upon a originating crime of aggression. Somehow the conversation in the media and in more sophisticated circles has shifted to whether we're winning or losing the war, rather than thinking about how to get out of a war that was unlawful from its first day. We should remember that back in 1945, the architects of the New World Order privileged the winners of World War II by giving them an unrestricted right of veto that paralyzed the decisional power of the UN at its birth. This constitutionally undercut the UN capacity to fulfill its war prevention mission as set forth in the preamble to the UN Charter. As the Mexican delegate to the drafting conference that established this UN architecture, exclaimed when asked what kind of organization has been achieved, his response is notable, I think. His words, "We have created an organization that regulates the mice while the tigers run free." This deference to geopolitics was reinforced at the Nuremberg and Tokyo war crimes that imposed criminality only for the crimes of the losers, refusing altogether to scrutinize, much less to prosecute, the crimes of the winners. This refusal meant that the development of nuclear weapons was never effectively prohibited. This tempts reflecting on an intriguing counterfactual. Let us suppose that Germany, which had its own advanced nuclear program, had won the race to develop the bomb and then dropped 2 atom bombs on British cities, yet went on to lose the war. As it was, the liberal West, led by the US, did not have the moral compass and political acumen it needed to give the world not only a victory over fascism and imperialism, but a peace-building process for the future that included the prohibition of the development, possession, threat of, and use of nuclear weaponry. Might humanity have been spared the endless traumas of the nuclear age that is now at the edge of the most frightening nuclear abyss, had it not been the winner of World War II? It's a frightening thought of its own. It is also a disturbing part of the picture that the original aggression toward Iran has virtually been erased from commentary on the wars in the Middle East by the most rational and wonkish of foreign policy establishment experts. Bipartisan mainstream talk, as I've suggested it, has been focused on whether the US is winning or losing this asymmetric war between countries of dramatically different capabilities. At this moment, to take account of the pre-Trump background accentuated by the threatened escalation in Iran and further stressed by the persistence of Israeli genocidal expansionism in Lebanon and the West Bank of occupied Palestine, if we are to avoid public gloom and private despair, it seems crucial to acknowledge all that is at stake if we wish for a better future. Cornel West, a friend of mine for many years and quite long ago a faculty colleague, said some impassionate words recently that express the danger of our time. We are not just facing a political crisis, we are facing a spiritual one. When greed is normalized, truth is disposable, and cruelty marketed, the soul of the nation is at stake. It's about our moral decay that rewards corruption and punishes integrity. We must call our young people back to courage, truth, justice, and love. I would only add to Cornel's words that it is not just our young people, but all people, and not only our people, but people throughout the world. I want also to call attention to the warnings given by the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, at this year's meeting of the World Economic Forum. Carney shocked his elite audience by an insistence that the unfolding internationally and historically of the present period is one of rupture rather than transition. And he used rupture as a negative word to talk about the tensions that Trump has largely brought to the surface and has created a fracturing of the Atlantic Alliance that had served to provide Western leadership ever since the end of World War II. And it's a interesting way of seeing the present context, which is one of challenging the coherence of this Western regional alliance that is racial and religious in part, in not just geographical, as it includes Australia and New Zealand, and somewhat problematically Turkey in part, but Turkey as of 1949, not Turkey as of 2026, where I think there's a different perception of the country. But the point is that what Carney was talking about and what he underscored by endorsing the initial strike of the US and Israel against Iran is that this was an intramural Western crisis of rupture or transition, not a global crisis. And I think that's a fundamental mistake if we are to create a world where the diverse peoples and civilizations learn to live together in a durable and way that is committed to peace and justice and to a more harmonious relationship with nature. Until we get that globality as the central feature of global governance, we will have this hierarchy in the world where it is the West against the rest. And that was the point of Samuel Huntington's notorious comments on the end of the Cold War. Didn't mean international stability or a geopolitical accommodation. It was the prelude to a clash of civilizations. And what we've seen in the Middle East and are seeing, and it makes these civilizational comments of Trump particularly relevant, is that these conflicts are not only traditional wars between states, they also have a civilizational identity. It was not accidental that all the countries that supported Israel in what it did in Gaza were from the white Christian West, non-geographically conceived to include Australia and New Zealand. It had that character, and of course it was preordained by the 9/11 attacks and the way in which President Bush responded to those attacks without sensing it could have been a moment to repair the hierarchy and exploitation of the global South rather than an occasion to jump into a war against quote unquote terror, as if that can be delimited and civilizationally confined to the Islamic world. I want to just refer in bringing these remarks to an end that there are two avenues, I believe, that lead in a positive direction, but they require a rethinking of how we conceive of the other. And the first of these, which I don't want to take the time to talk about in detail, is to learn from China rather than to think of them as a rival that we must overwhelm. China achieved what very few countries achieved, an ascendancy from being one of the worst off of major third world or global south countries to being a economic superpower that didn't rely on military expansion to achieve its global stature, but rather found ways of producing win-win relations with more than 150 countries. And it's far from a perfect society and has internal issues that are grave, although it raised 300 million people in less than a decade out of a condition of extreme poverty. And no other country has done that. And it has been attentive to the well-being of its own people, not just the projection of its power. And as often been said, it's a master of the long game of international relations, not of the immediate agenda of win-lose connections that were epitomized by the colonial relationship between European colonialism and the global South, that hierarchy, exploitative hierarchy that we understood in racial terms with South African apartheid, but also had its economistic terms in relation to the post-colonial period, and then has its nuclear dimension in the hegemonic possession of nuclear weapons by these permanent members of the Security Council that are unwilling to be accountable as sovereign equal states and are willing to go to war to prevent others from acquiring the weaponry that they insist upon using without accountability and without any kind of restrictions. And one has the sense that China is ready to make an accommodation that would denuclearize international relations. And the other kind of learning is more historical, and it's a matter of taking the opportunities to enhance the human experience rather than to view it as a moment of where material and political domination can occur. And I've been personally influenced by a famous poem of Robert Frost called "The Road Not Taken." And I read just a few lines from this last stanza. And I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere here, ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one least traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And why it's relevant to our circumstance is that the US, as the victor in World War II, had an extraordinary opportunity to structure the world in a way that would have brought prosperity and peace for at least a generation, if not longer. But it chose, as I mentioned, to play the traditional winner's game of not seeking systemic benefits, but seeking to maximize the gains of the winners and to project that into the future by way of the veto, by the notion of criminality for the losers, by that whole way. And there was a second opportunity at the unexpected collapse of the Soviet Union, and the moment where this nuclear weaponry could have been eliminated through a monitored agreement, and the UN reformed to make it able to play the role that was hoped for it as a war prevention institution. And now, maybe, just maybe, the crisis that we confront at this moment, and we will be confronting it for the next 2 weeks at best, and I'm not optimistic because you have the collision of two extremisms. The extremism of a leader that can't accept the reality of political defeat, and the extremism of a political configuration in Iran that prefers martyrdom to some kind of compromise. And when you have these two extremisms colliding with each other, you have to be a wild-eyed optimist to think that they can come to a mutually satisfactory agreement. And so, in closing, I feel that these two, learning to seize these moments of flux, whether you call them ruptures or transitions, and trying to follow a path that learns from China, are two ways forward toward a better future for all of humanity. Let me stop there.
Need to get this. Maybe I don't know. Do you know how to get this out? Sorry. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. Where do I begin? For your kindness, for your love, for your support, and for your wisdom, and for really weaving for us a narrative of the nuclear age so incisively, connecting the past to the future, the current moment, the moral decay. This really is a challenging time, and I truly just cannot think of a better person than to give us some insight into where we are and how we hope to get out of this very, very dark place. So thank you so much. I am going to now read the remarks from Cynthia, her response to Richard's lecture, because Cynthia was, has known Richard for 50 years. The story that she tells is that she left Mount Holyoke College, I believe, in her first year. She transferred to Princeton so that she could study with Professor Richard Falk. And I understand from her that this was 50 years ago, and she's still so deeply grateful to you. But let me, instead of my telling you how she feels about Richard, let me read her own words. So I'm quoting Cynthia Lazaroff. Thank you, dear Richard, for once again sharing the gift of your brilliant insights and wisdom at this perilous moment. Thank you for once again reminding us of the gravity of what's at stake for humanity, the colossal suffering and loss of life, the devastating humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in the Middle East and beyond, the cataclysmic impacts rippling across the globe that we're only beginning to understand, and the ever-present danger of escalation to an unthinkable nuclear confrontation. Thank you for so powerfully illuminating these issues at the heart of our work at the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation since our inception over 40 years ago, the quest for peace and the abolition of nuclear weapons. As I reflect on your words, I'm reminded of two ideas that you have shared previously, which have touched me deeply and stayed with me ever since. Both have a profound resonance for today. First, in the context of nuclear dangers in the Ukraine war, you said that we have reached, and I quote, in quotes, an apocalyptic tipping point in human history where the alternatives are some kind of diplomatic accommodation, what you just discussed, which seems highly implausible and unlikely at this point, or a march towards collective or species suicide, end of quote. And for me, this speaks to your gift that I have been blessed to receive over and over again since I was your student 50 years ago, your gift to waking us up, your call to pay attention, to stay vigilant and awake to the ever-present existential stakes of our time. The second idea that you wrote about in your memoir, Citizen Pilgrim, you call it the politics of possibility. This has become a kind of mantra for me. You remind us that we have lived to see the world change and to witness the seemingly impossible happen sometimes quickly, like the fall of the Berlin Wall. We have lived to see the end of the Cold War and massive reductions in our nuclear arsenals, the end of apartheid in South Africa, and more. You remind us that the future is not preordained, that what might appear as an inevitable march into oblivion doesn't have to be. You celebrate the agency and power of the people, of civil society, to rise and change the course of history. You beckon us to mobilize, as we once did, to end the Vietnam War. In so doing, you shine the light of hope for a way forward. Thank you with all my heart, and bless you, dear Richard. End of quote. So what we're going to do now is we'll just do a few questions, a little bit of a dialogue between Richard and me, and then we will open it up for questions from the audience. We're aiming to finish at 7:45, so we have about 30 more minutes. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Richard, I wanted to begin by asking you to comment in a more specific way on your involvement in 3 areas, all of which are either directly or indirectly relevant to today's moment and personally relevant to your decades of scholarship on international law, as well as peace activism. As Mara put it so beautifully, you have this extraordinary career of mixing the kinds of things that often aren't mixed. So I want to ask first about Gaza, and I want to ask you a little bit about the Gaza Tribunal, to tell us a little bit about the tribunal, its findings, and where we can expect to go from here. My question to you really is whether the international tide has turned sufficiently to envision Palestine joining as a UN member state, and to envision a 2-state solution being implemented in the Middle East. So let's start with that question. Well, we'll be here for a week, but
Well, the whole idea of the Gaza People's Tribunal was that governments were not stopping the carnage, and the UN was helpless and useless in the setting of the ongoing genocide. That we felt, and I worked closely with Hilal throughout the process of establishing the tribunal. It was sort of brought about as sort of we don't deserve so much credit for bringing it about. We were visited while in Turkey by some people that said, we should undertake this, and we have the funding to help you, which was a big inducement, because it's very difficult to organize something where you have to raise funds for people to travel from all over the world. And so that part of it was, we felt a kind of obligation to do something, and I believe that the outcome of this tribunal, together with Jeremy Corbyn, did a version of it, calling it also the Gaza. He stole our name, but we were more or less friendly. I testified in his tribunal in London, and their tribunal focused on British complicity, and there was another in Canada that focused on Canadian complicity. And these were, I think, effective in reaching a certain part of the relevant communities. Our two public sessions were in Sarajevo and in Istanbul, and a side event at the UN in New York. And I think it generated very powerful testimony from witnesses, survivors, and experts. And a jury of conscience delivered the verdict. And it was a very distinguished group of 6 people, and led by Christine Chinkin, a respected professor at London School of Economics. And to call it a jury of conscience was to suggest that we weren't pretending to be a court of law. We were the voice of the people, aggrieved, outraged, disturbed by what was happening in Gaza and by the failure of the liberal democracies to be at least detached, if not helping to find a way toward accommodation and peaceful approach. What the future of the Palestinian people have been not helped by the wishes of others, including the UN, that partitioned historic Palestine without ever consulting the resident population. And I think that the present period where Trump presides over this board of peace is a terrible moment, both because it's received the blessings of the UN and it has engaged in a kind of Orwellian doublespeak as to what is peace and justice. It rewards the criminal and punishes the victim. And that's not a good way of establishing a humane future. As far as 2 states or 1 state, most Palestinians that I've been in touch with don't feel the 2 states can work. There are too many settlers that are determined to remain and are violent and militant and would create a very problematic future. I was a close friend of Edward Said, who's probably the most distinguished public intellectual among the Palestinian people, at least living outside. They have a large number, surprisingly large number of very articulate and thoughtful personalities. But his vision he died in 2003, but his vision earlier than that was that only a one state, one secular state based on equality of the 2 peoples could succeed. And he deeply believed in that. if there was a two-state, it's almost certain it would be a mini-state dominated by Israel and probably neutralized, sitting next to this Prussian militarized state, and that would not be very stable as far as the future is concerned. I think younger Palestinians wouldn't accept it over time, and Israel, I don't know how they would respond to it. So I think my own sense is there will not be peace in between Israel and the Palestinians until on the Israeli side, Zionism is either rejected as part of the governing ideology or is radically changed in its view of how to live with the Palestinians. And you should remember that before, we should all remember, that before this Gaza war occurred, there were a series of thoughtful, objective studies that established that the Israel-Palestine relationship was one of apartheid. In other words, that Israel as the occupying power was committed to a policy of apartheid. And that was validated by the judgments of the International Court of Justice and indirectly by the International Criminal Court. So I think that there have to be, and then the other thing that something has to be done about the Palestinian refugees that have lived as refugees since 1947. And that's been a no-go issue for Israel and a must issue for the Palestinians. So again, it's a collision of views. I do feel that the Palestinians are far readier for a accommodation and compromise than is Israel, which views its mission to be, at least as influenced by Zionist ideology, its mission to be one of occupying and being sovereign in the whole of historic Palestine. They don't accept. The one thing the Palestinians and Israelis agree about is not accepting two states, at least two real states. And that is strange in the light that that's the only thing the global community affirms is two states. So you find, because it's sort of politically, since it won't happen, it's politically neutral.
Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you. That's so important for us to hear, and especially given your deep ties to the Palestinian communities, and I assume also through the tribunal, really learning about what would work for them, because clearly what's been happening now for nearly 80 years has not worked for the Palestinian people.
Devising their own future.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I love that you mentioned Anwar Said. I think some people here know that I live in New York most of the time. I do love visiting Santa Barbara. And I actually live in the building, and Richard has been to my apartment before I was in it. with the previous family, the Rabi family. And he's been to Edward Said's apartment, which is in the building next door. So this is, of course, Edward Said was writing about the one-state solution and had op-eds in the New York Times. The New York Times would not let you write an op-ed on this if you were to do that today. Times have certainly changed. Anyway, thank you. I know I'm going to take one more question, which is really relevant to what we're experiencing, have been experiencing since, in many ways for, over 47 years, but very acutely in recent weeks, and most especially since February 28th. In 1979, you had a historic meeting with Ayatollah Khomeini in Paris. This was before his return to Iran. And I want to ask you a little bit about where things have gone since that meeting, and where we are today, including, of course, this first military aggression against Iran ordered by a US president since the Islamic Revolution. Trump's threats, as both of us have been saying, have truly reached a crescendo. And my question to you is whether there is an exit ramp. I know you said that there's such a disconnect between what these two regimes want, what Trump wants, but is there an exit ramp that Trump might find? And if not, what could the US general public do to turn the tide against the war?
Again, it's
No, I know.
a tough assignment. I'm glad you're not my teacher. No, actually, I'm sorry, but you are. Actually, the meeting with Khomeini in January of 1979 really fit with my comments, my sort of disorganized comments today, because that's in my view, a prime example of the road not taken. Khomeini made it very clear, and if nothing else, he tells you what he thinks and wants and feels. He made it very clear if the U.S. normalized its response to the revolutionary movement that brought the Islamic Republic into being, and didn't try to do what it did in 1953. He was very conscious of the earlier coup that against a democratically elected leader, secular leader, that had a certain resemblance to the Venezuelan experience just now, where oil was one of the issues, and he indicated that if the U.S. would accept this self-determination, and it was an overwhelmingly supported revolution against the Shah, revolutionary movement against the Shah, including by secular people at that time. And I was with the former Attorney General of the US, Ramsey Clark, and we also had a meeting with the American ambassador, who said the same thing as Khomeini. He said, this is, and he was a very conservative guy. He was, had been the ambassador in Laos, where they bombed the countryside, and had been a real hawk, even complained about by Westmoreland, the American leading general. But he said too that Brzezinski blocked normalization. He was the national security advisor and very close to the Shah's ambassador in Washington. And he wouldn't accept the outcome, and Carter listened to him rather than to his Secretary of State, who had a more moderate view, Cyrus Vance. And from then on, Iran has been sanctioned and given a pariah position in the thinking of both political parties. Biden let it be known that whatever trouble Israel had with Iran, the US would support Israel completely. And so I think that as this regime in Iran definitely alienated a large part of the public, but it also survived all sorts of efforts to destabilize and overthrow it. And any government subject to sustained covert efforts at destabilization, very punitive sanctions, threats of war if it developed a nuclear capability, with complete silence about Israel's nuclear arsenal. And to this day, you hear not a word about creating a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East, which all the Arab governments and Iran have indicated their support for. And so I think under those circumstances, I think the leadership became paranoid, and I think most leaderships would become paranoid. Remember what the US did after Pearl Harbor to the Japanese community in California. We regretted it afterwards, but for the Japanese, who had deep roots in American society, it was a traumatic experience to be suddenly treated as dangerous enemies, whereas the German minorities were not. See, there was a racially driven element. So I think that this is definitely deserves to be studied as a road not taken, that should have been taken. And we might be living in a different kind of world if it had been taken.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'm really glad that you mentioned the Middle East weapons of mass destruction free zone. I actually just wrote an article, and it was accepted this morning by Al Jazeera in Arabic about this topic and the way in which it's actually been Israel and the United States that have been blocking these efforts, which are decades long. Iran and Egypt started this in 1974. and the efforts are ongoing, but obviously progress has been rather scant. We have just a few minutes, and I'm thinking that maybe we can take one question if Richard, if you feel up for it. Okay. Is there someone who'd
I'll
like
try
to
to
ask
be
a
brief.
question? Yep. Here we go. I'm gonna give you the.
Richard, thank you very much. A question about a road taken by 30 generals and admirals, mostly of special forces, refusing to take part in the war. 13 have been fired, by the way. Also, the road taken by soldiers and Marines at the Gerald Ford ship who have sabotaged the ship, making it impossible to use the sanitary facilities. So the ship is now in Croatia for repairs. It will take a while. This is a road taken. What? And by the way, in the road taken by the media, they are war media. They do not report this. Richard, what is your thought about this? Do you know this?
I didn't get the last part.
What is your thought about this?
What is?
About this road taken by the generals and the
mean
admirals?
The resistance to the Trump policies.
A boycott.
What?
Yeah, I think the question is the example being given of the generals essentially boycotting and the admirals and the warship ending up in the Adriatic.
And these are special forces, very heavy. And also a friend of mine asked me to ask this question.
So is there some hope for a military response to what Trump is doing? I think that's, can we translate the question
No,
into that?
I think it's a very important question, and I think it may be our last hope. I hate to say that, but I don't see Congress as having the stamina or the moral integrity to play their constitutional role. And so I think given the alternatives of enduring this mentally unstable leader who has sole access to the nuclear football, even if there was no problem with Iran or no problems, he doesn't belong in that office. And I think that, if a military coup happened and the coup leaders came through with I'm sure their initial reassurance to reestablish constitutional government, it would be welcomed by 80% of the country.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. And let me invite you all to join me in thanking Richard once again for his wonderful I really just could not be happier than to share the stage with Richard. He's been, to me, just a personal source of not only advice and support, but love and kindness. and being at the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation overall, and most especially with you, has truly been an honor of my life. Let me also thank all of you for being with us here tonight. Please, if you don't already, look us up on our website, wagingpeace.org. If you like Substack, we've recently established a new Substack called Nuclear Insanity, and you can see our writing, including Richard's writing and interviews and other things. Our social media accounts. If you're not on our mailing list, please let us know. We can take your email here, or you can join on our website. We'd love to keep you up to date with what we're doing, including local events here in Santa Barbara. I invite you to support us, to join us. And this is truly I think this mission of a world free of nuclear weapons is truly a defining issue of our time. And I, once again, couldn't be more grateful than to spend this evening with Richard and with all of you tonight. So thank you again so much for being with us.